Hopefully nobody knows I'm using the same model as last year. Back in the 80s, Nintendo was the king of video game design. I mean, who can blame you when you make the king of platformers, Mario? So many companies over the years have tried to replicate the magic that Nintendo made with this Italian plumber. There are of course the iconic Sonic the Hedgehog and Crash Bandicoot, but then there are the ones that are very obscure, for better and for worse. But in the past few years, a lot of obscure platformers, or thought to be dead franchises, managed to make a comeback, even Bubsy of all people. With 2022 being one of the biggest comebacks for platformers with KO the Kangaroo, and the franchise we're going to be talking about, Klonoa. Back in December, I actually made a poll of which franchise I should talk about next, and Klonoa was the lucky winner. Sorry, Little Tail Bronx, maybe next time. During my development of this retrospective, Namco announces Klonoa Fantasy Reverie series, a full-fledged remake of both Door to Phantomile and Lunatia's Veil. And trust me when I say that was probably the highlight for me of this Nintendo Direct. That and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Live Alive actually looks really cool. Mario Strikers. Actually, you know what? In hindsight, that Nintendo Direct was really awesome. Of course, considering we're going to be talking about the first Klonoa game, obviously we should talk about his origins, or development. Klonoa was created by Hideo Yoshizawa, who has been in the gaming industry since its resurrection from the gaming crash thanks to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Yoshizawa was behind some of the biggest titles in gaming history, for obvious reasons. I mean, he made Ninja Gaiden, for better and for worse. But during the late 90s, he started working with Namco, and Namco wanted to make a new IP for the massively successful PlayStation 1. Now, funnily enough, the original design was a golem-like creature, but Yoshizawa decided to do something a bit more cuter, and that was the creation of one of the most underappreciated IPs in gaming history, Little Tail Bronx. I'm kidding, obviously Klonoa. Trust me, Cybercrack, I will do an entire video on your series. And this led to the very first game of the series, Klonoa Door to Phantomile. Klonoa Door to Phantomile was released in 1997, published by both Sony and Namco, and developed by both Namco and Payon DP, a Japanese game developer who has quite the library for games they co-developed. The game begins with Klonoa's main item, called the Wind Ring, slowly falling from the sky. The first cutscene shows Klonoa walking in the forest, and the Wind Ring lands near Klonoa and awakens a blue ball named Yupao. We see them potentially forming a bond, and then the world ends. Kidding, it was all a dream. Or was it? Just want to say, that's going to be a running thing throughout this series. We later see a strange thing crash into Bell Hill. Klonoa and Yupao go off to investigate, thus beginning the game. Controls for the game are incredibly simple. So obviously you use the C stick or the D-pad to move around. By pressing the X button you can jump, and if you hold it you'll do a light hover, which is great for platforming, and pressing the circle button will allow you to fire a wind bullet. And your enemies for the game are too bloody adorable to really be called enemies. This subspecies is one of the most iconic in the Klonoa franchise, called moos, which is kind of weird considering they look more like bunnies and not cows. Actually, that's something I should mention about Klonoa. Klonoa is a unique species of creature that was made by Yoshizawa. Having features of a dog, cat, and rabbit, fans of the series have considered him a cabbage. Wait, no, that's not right. Klonoa, as a species, has been referred to as a cabbit, a cat rabbit. I kind of say he kind of looks more like a dog, like the ones with the big floppy ears. Which is how Klonoa is capable of doing that hovering, and the hovering is used for one thing, 2D platformer, which makes Klonoa the odd one out when it comes to the PlayStation 1. With games like Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot emphasizing more on 3D platforming, Klonoa, however, decides to keep more to his roots of his ancient ancestors in the next age of gaming. The only difference is, even though most of the characters in this game are in 2D sprite form, the areas around them, including the terrain, is all in 3D. Which gives the 2D platform more of a 3D element, as there are moments when Klonoa can even look forward and backward, or go forward and backwards in a platformer, where you can change the axis of where you're going in certain points of the level, giving the 2D sprite characters extra dimension to their design, making Klonoa creative in level design, and what a lot of people, especially Catechris, call 2.5D platforming. And you can't have a platformer without collectibles. Obviously, one of the most common ones you'll be finding are these little jewels. If you collect 100, you'll earn an extra life. There's also tokens that will give you an automatic extra life. There's these little creatures in bubbles that'll give you double jewels for a limited amount of time, and you'll come across bubbles with people inside symbols, each symbol representing the type of species that's in the world of Klonoa. These are the citizens of Phantomile, and depending where you are in the game, the type of citizen you'll rescue depend on which vision you'll access. Levels in the game are broken down into two-part visions, each story element acting like a two-part story. The first half is usually the beginning of the story, and the second half is the end of the story, with a boss at the end of the second vision. The visions are based off many different places within the world of Phantomile, with the first world being Breezegale, home of the Bell Hill, is home to the Cabot-like people like Klonoa. Warlock is a jungle full of tribal-based people, with a nice forest structure and treetop villages. Jugpot is an aquatic kingdom, which you can kinda consider like Atlantis. And there are soldiers, and are probably the cutest soldiers in gaming, on par with the Waddle Dee. There's Coronia, and I'm sorry for the poorly timed name, which is a steampunk-like floating fortress. And lastly is Cress, the legendary Moon Kingdom and home of Hupao. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should probably explain the story. Now, considering that Fantasy Reverie is going to be coming out later on this year, and I'll do a video when that comes out. By the way, Bandai Namco, can you get me a physical copy of the Switch version, please? Thank you, love you. So, I will be putting a spoiler ahead. So skip to this part of the video if you don't want to be spoiled. When we arrive at Bell Hill, we meet a dark being known as Gaudius, who's kidnapped the idol of the Moon Kingdom, Lafis, who we learn, thanks to this big guy named Baloo, is actually the idol of the legendary Moon Kingdom, and her song is used for healing abilities. Gaudius wants to turn the world of Phantomile into a kingdom of nightmares, and must use Lafi's song in order to awaken Nahatum, a nightmare creature in a long slumber that would bring disaster to all of Phantomile. But to get to the Moon Kingdom, we must find a moon pendant Klonoa happened to find, and give to his grandpa. Later on, Gaudius' henchman, Joka, tries to take the pendant by killing Klonoa's grandpa. Oh, did I forget to mention, this series can get very dark and emotional at times. Now, this is actually something I should mention about Klonoa's design in game. Though Klonoa may look like a cutesy adventure, in truth, that is far from the point. Yoshizawa actually wanted to make a video game that would be both entertaining for kids and investing for adults. So obviously killing your grandpa was one of those things that they added to, raise the emotional damage. And trust me when I say, we are far from done with all the emotional damage. As we head to the Moon Kingdom and discover Hupao is actually the prince of the Moon Kingdom with a human form. But more on that later, as we have to defeat Gaudius. But sadly, he summons Nahatum before his death, and with the combined power of the kingdoms and friendship, we slay the nightmare monster Nahatum. The day is saved, and we get our happy ending, right? Wrong. After everything, Hupao tells Klonoa that Phantomile isn't his world, and Klonoa is shocked and flat out denies Hupao's words. Can't blame him, his grandpa died. Wait, was he even his grandpa? To make the ending even sadder, apparently, when Lafi starts singing to heal the world, Klonoa is forced to leave Phantomile, and both Hupao and Klonoa don't want to say goodbye. Klonoa is gone, and the game ends with pictures of your adventure, and the cover with your name on it, which I'll go into more detail about next time. Klonoa may look like a cute game, but it can get really dark and depressing at times. Basically, Klonoa was pulling a Kirby before Kirby was pulling a Kirby, which also makes it really weird considering there's an epilogue level. By beating the game, you unlock an extra level that puts Klonoa's platforming to the test, to where I honestly couldn't have beat it. But if you beat it and you rescue all the citizens and get to meet Lafis, you unlock a music player. At the time, it was a great reward for beating the game, because the music in this game I think is really good. There were just generally a lot of things I really liked about the game. Structured the platforming, the unique puzzle-based platforming elements using the characters. But I do have some noteworthy gripes to the game. The game itself is still designed for kids and can be easily beaten in a matter of hours. But the story-based gameplay makes it really interesting. Though the 3D level design can be a little tricky, especially when it comes to throwing enemies at the foreground. Trust me when I say that got really annoying for me when I faced Joka during a boss fight. Not to mention the momentum-based structure that Klonoa does have in his platforming. When Klonoa keeps running around, and when he finally makes a stop, he slides a little, making some of Klonoa's platforming somewhat slippery. The platforming I still say is really good, but that's usually something easy you can handle, especially if you hold the hover button and you don't really slide. But you kind of stay in place in the air. Basically sacrifice momentum-based jumping with more easy landing platforming. Though when you pick up and inflate enemies, yes, that's a real thing that you can do in Klonoa. Forgot to mention that. You can't really use the hover ability, but instead you do get a double jump, and of course that double jump does give you more jumping ability, but it's how you use it for certain situations. And even though if you destroyed an enemy during a specific part where you need it for a collectible, no worries, most of the enemies tend to respawn automatically, adding a bit more of that easy gameplay that I mentioned before. And lastly, I think one of my biggest gripes with the game, now this is something that I'll talk about again in my next video in Lunatia's Veil, but I feel like the bond of both Klonoa and Hupao is too forced. Like, I don't really see their bond throughout the game. They just chatter a bit and they live together, giving the idea of their friendship being off-screen, and when Hupao throws that massive truth bomb to Klonoa, their bond kind of felt that way, because that's kind of how it was. But I think when Hupao was wanting to tell the truth about Klonoa's, origins, he really wanted to be his friend, not a lie that he made himself. Its ending is still really emotional, but yeah, we'll get there when we get there. Klonoa, Door to Phantomile may seem like a simple 2D platformer at first, but its story, characters, and platform gameplay makes me regard it as one of the best platformers on the PlayStation, on par with both Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. So I just have to ask, why didn't the Wii version get as much love? During the 2000s, company Namco actually merged with another company called Bandai and eventually became Bandai Namco. And they were really interested in making tons of new games, though there was interest to bring Klonoa back to the limelight. And they tried that in 2008 with Klonoa on the Wii. This time published by Bandai Namco, and it was actually developed again by PoundDP, who returned as a developer for the remake. And honestly, there's not really much to say about this game. It's a scene-by-scene retelling of the first game, just with better graphics, sort of, a redesign of Klonoa, which fans actually voted for as the original concept was gross, and they also added English voice acting. For most of the characters, it was really interesting, except for Klonoa. He sounded like a Sonic the Hedgehog character.
Come on, let's go! To take it easy and rest. After all, you don't have to worry about Natum now.
The controls are also the same, but I do think the platforming has improved a bit, and you can actually use multiple control settings for the Wii version, whether it be holding the Wiimote sideways, nunchuck, using a classic controller, and of course, a GameCube controller, unless you're playing on the Wii U. Then the GameCube controller is a no-no. Yoshizawa also returned as a producer of this game instead of the director. I mean, what's the point of directing a remake besides, building everything the way it was back from scratch? There are a lot of interesting things about the game I find interesting. Of course, the voice acting. This time around, I did play it in English just to hear what the voices sounded like in English. One of the most interesting voice actors was the voice of Hupao. Hupao is voiced by Laura Bailey. Yes, Toru Honda English dub Fruits Basket Laura Bailey. Another thing I didn't realize also when playing the last game, and that's how much the levels are interconnected with one another. The areas from the background are actual areas you eventually go to within the game. I didn't really notice it that much, mostly because of the polygons of the old PlayStation 1 graphics, but with the Wiimake, you see a lot of the things that make up the game, whether it's in the level design or even the platforming. They also fixed Klonoa's momentum issue I had with the first game, but instead of getting 6 hit points, you actually get 10 this time before you lose a life. But it might be me, but it made me feel like damage boosting through most of the game, making me lose most of the challenge that was in the original. But of course, I beat the whole game again, and after beating it, you will unlock a few exclusive things that you can even play in the Wii version. Obviously, there is the challenge mode, but now there are new other modes too, such as a 3D model viewer where you can see all the characters that are in the game, a theater mode where you can rewatch clips from your adventure, a reverse mode that lets you play the entire game, but the levels are mirrored, kind of pointless, a time attack where you can beat all the bosses as quick as possible, and a costume changing area where you can change Klonoa's outfit to his original outfit from Door to Phantomile, the iconic Klonoa 2 outfit, and a festival themed outfit. Also, for some reason, it's at the burnt remains of your grandpa's house. I mean, that is probably where Klonoa lived and that's where his clothes are, but why is it still burned to the ground? But ironically enough, the first Klonoa game was also his last. As until recently, Klonoa has laid dormant for 13 years, and that's mostly due to how the Wii version sold very poorly. Due to little to no advertisement of the game, I mean, I kid you not, I think I only saw one Klonoa commercial on TV my entire life. Not to mention that there were many cartoon-like characters on the Wii, found in both big IPs and terrible shovelware. Klonoa just kind of fit in with the crowd, and was lost to obscurity. Bandai Namco, I believe, learned their lesson from the Wiimake, as I think announcing Klonoa on a Nintendo Direct was a smart move. And with how advanced the internet has gotten since '08, I believe Klonoa will make the comeback he truly deserved, and hopefully with an upcoming continuation of the Klonoa franchise. With that, we can conclude our look back on Klonoa, Door to Phantomile. And with the first game down, the next game in our Klonoa retrospective is the sequel that doesn't get as much attention as it should, so tune in next time as I take a look at Klonoa 2, Lunadea's Veil. Thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel, make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. Make sure to share this video around and let people know that Klonoa is making a comeback. So until I get that video ready, have a nice day everyone.